The South Pacific, the 20th of February 1942, high above a blue sea. 9 enemy bombers are driving straight toward an American aircraft carrier and the 2,000 men aboard her. One American fighter plane stands in their way. Its pilot has just learned that the rest of his squadron is too far off to help and that his only wingman cannot fire. He is alone, he is low on ammunition, and the bombers are almost in range of his ship. He turns toward all 9 of them. The pilot is Lieutenant Edward O'Hare, and the ship behind him is the carrier Lexington, the heart of the small American fleet fighting in the Pacific in the dark first months after Pearl Harbor. If those bombers get through, the Lexington could be crippled or sunk, and 2,000 sailors with her. O'Hare is the one fighter in position to stop it. What he decides to do in the next few minutes is the reason a name millions of Americans know is written over an airport today. Subscribe for true stories of the men who made impossible choices. Now, to understand why a man would turn one fighter toward 9 bombers, alone knowing the odds, you have to understand who Edward O'Hare was and where he came from. The choice he made over the Pacific that afternoon did not come out of nowhere. It came from a quiet, stubborn sense of right and wrong that he had inherited, of all places, from a father tangled up with the most famous gangster in America. Edward O'Hare, called Butch since boyhood, was born in St. Louis in 1914. His father, Edward Sr., was a sharp lawyer who went to work for Al Capone, the gangster who ran Chicago. For years, the elder O'Hare lived inside that world, and then he did something that would cost him his life. He went secretly to the federal government and helped them build the case that finally put Capone in prison. A few years later, he was shot dead in his car. He had chosen to do the right thing, knowing what it might cost. His son was watching. Butch O'Hare took a different road than his father, a clean one. He won an appointment to the Naval Academy at Annapolis, graduated, and found the thing he was born to do the first time he went up in an airplane. He became a naval aviator, a carrier fighter pilot, and a very good one, calm and precise and deadly with the guns. By the time the war came, he was a lieutenant flying the stubby little Grumman Wildcat off the deck of the Lexington, one of the few carrier fighters standing between Japan and the wide-open Pacific. In February 1942, 2 months after Pearl Harbor, America was losing. The Lexington and her task force were sent deep into enemy waters to strike the big Japanese base at Rabaul, to hit back and show the Pacific was still contested. But before they could get close, a Japanese search plane found them. Surprise was gone. The Americans knew now that the enemy knew exactly where they were, and that somewhere over the horizon, land-based bombers were already being loaded and sent out to find and sink the carrier. The waiting was its own kind of agony. The crew went to battle stations and stared at the empty sky, knowing what was coming and not when. On the carrier's deck, fighters were spotted and ready, engines warm. In the ready room, the pilots sat in their flight gear, O'Hare among them, listening to the radio crackle and the talk of bogies on the radar, that brand-new and half-trusted machine that could see what the eye could not. Then the call came. Enemy aircraft inbound. The fighters roared off the deck into a bright tropical sky to meet them. The first wave of bombers came in, and the American fighters tore into them, and a wild, scattered fight broke out across the sky. Bombers went down trailing smoke, but fighting takes fuel and ammunition, and it scatters men across miles of air, and while that first fight still raged, a second formation appeared, lower and closer, 9 more bombers in a tight box, driving steadily straight in toward the Lexington, and there was almost nobody left to stop them. O'Hare and his wingman were the only 2 fighters between those 9 bombers and the ship. 2 against 9, and then it got worse. His wingman's guns jammed, every one of them, leaving the man helpless, able only to fly alongside and watch. That left exactly 1 American fighter with working guns in the path of the formation, 1 plane, and when O'Hare checked his ammunition, he found he did not even have a full load left, only enough for a few good bursts. By every cold calculation, there was nothing 1 fighter could do against 9 bombers. Here was the choice, and O'Hare had only seconds to make it. He could do what made sense, hang back, shadow the bombers, save himself, and watch them bomb his ship. Or he could spend what little he had, his few bursts of ammunition and quite possibly his life, on a near-hopeless attack, on the chance that he might break up the formation before it reached the 2,000 men behind him. It was not really a calculation. It was a question of what kind of man he was. He pushed the nose of his Wildcat over and dove straight into the 9. And it is worth a moment on the men in those bombers. They were not faceless. They were youngstermen far from home, holding formation under attack the way they had been trained, trusting the gunners beside them, doing their duty toward their own country exactly as O'Hare was doing his. Many of them would not live out the next 10 minutes. 2 groups of brave young men, sent by their nations to kill each other over a patch of empty ocean, each one certain his side's story like the right. That is the truth under almost every story like this one. O'Hare came in from the side, fast, and did the thing that made him so dangerous. He did not spray and pray. He flew in close, picked one bomber and fired short, precise bursts into its engines, saving every round. The engine tore loose and the bomber fell out of the formation. He shifted his aim to the next and fired again, and a second engine came apart, and a second bomber dropped away. He was flying through the fire of all their gunners, threading between the bombers, hammering them one at a time with a marksman's discipline. What the men on the Lexington saw looking up was almost impossible to believe. A single American fighter was inside the enemy formation, weaving through it, and one by one the bombers were falling out of the sky. O'Hare made pass after pass, each time picking a target, firing his careful bursts, and pulling away to come again. He seemed to be everywhere among them at once. Smoke trails scratched across the blue as bomber after bomber staggered, burned, and went down toward the sea. It was enough. The formation that had been driving so steadily toward the carrier came apart under his attack. The surviving bombers rattled, their box broken, dropped their loads where the splashes hurt nothing, and turned away. The few bombs that did fall near the Lexington missed her. The carrier steamed on, untouched, 2,000 men safe, because for a few minutes one pilot with a near-empty gun had refused to let 9 bombers through. When O'Hare finally turned back toward the deck, his ammunition was all but gone. The gun camera in his Wildcat had recorded much of it, and when the film was developed it confirmed what the disbelieving crew had watched. In a matter of minutes, alone, low on ammunition, O'Hare had shot down or wrecked a string of enemies and saved his ship. It made him the United States Navy's first flying ace of the war. The Navy and the nation, starved for good news in those dark months, seized on the story of the lone pilot who took on a whole formation and won. That spring, Butch O'Hare stood in the White House while the President of the United States placed the Medal of Honor around his neck, the first naval aviator of the war to receive it. His wife stood beside him. He was deeply uncomfortable with all of it, the cameras and the speeches and the word hero, and he said more than once that the real story was simpler than they were making it. There had been bombers headed for his ship. He was the man in the way, and so he had done what the man in the way is supposed to do. He went back to the war, because that was the other thing the man in the way is supposed to do. He helped pioneer the dangerous new craft of flying fighters off carriers at night, hunting enemy bombers in the dark when no one else could. And on a black night in November 1943, over the Pacific, during one of those first night intercepts, his fighter was hit and went down into the sea. Butch O'Hare was 29 years old. His body was never found. A few years after the war, the city of Chicago needed a name for the great new airport it was building, and it chose his. Today, O'Hare is one of the busiest airports on Earth, and millions of travelers hurry through it every year. Under his name, almost none of them knowing whose it is. They do not know about the 9 bombers, or the jammed guns, or the near-empty ammunition cans, or the 2,000 men who went home to their families because one pilot decided the odds did not matter as much as the people behind him. Years later, a young pilot, asked what he would have done in O'Hare's place, admitted he did not know. An older flyer told him the truth. None of us knows until the moment comes, but O'Hare showed us what the moment asks. You will almost never face 9 bombers. You will face the day when you are the only one who can help, and helping will cost you. On that day, you go. Edward O'Hare went. Remember the man, not just the airport. Subscribe if you want the next story. There are more names worth knowing.